Merry Christmas, New Year, interim period thing, everyone, and I hope you're all looking forward to getting rid of 2016 so we can get on to the fun carnage that will be 2017. Right, so what I'd like to chat about is free movement, freedom of movement, and this is an area that we need to address, not least because you have characters like Andy Burnham, who earlier this month was saying that the Labour Party is getting it wrong by putting single market access ahead of immigration issues. Freedom of movement isn't working for us. We need to get rid of it. He flip-flopped into the middle of the road, and to paraphrase Nye Bevan, the founder of the NHS, those who meander into the middle of the road get run over. Now, if he wanted to come to that position with some strong solutions about what we should do with immigration, then fine. But he didn't. He just flip-flopped into the middle, hoping to curry favour with people, and ended up getting butchered. So, what are the solutions to this freedom of movement issue? I mean, a lot of people recognise that immigration is important for countries when it brings in skilled individuals at all levels, actually, when you have an aging population and you need the extra workforce. So as a framework, it is productive. However, there are fallouts in terms of how it's perceived in local communities, or when immigration to local communities adds strain to those communities. What are the reasonable solutions to this? Well, there are two sort of categories here. One is to come out of the freedom of movement agreement and then try and have some carve out, some sort of almost like opt-back-ins in order to try and get those people that you want via a productive system. And then the other one is to stay within the freedom of movement framework with modifications. So looking at the first, which would be the choice of the hard Brexiters and so forth, their solutions have been that we want out because we want control of our borders, is what they say. So I'm going to go on a slight tangent here and say control of our borders has got nothing to do with freedom of movement, because we control our borders perfectly. We don't have land borders with anyone except Ireland. People who come in by ferry or fly in, they all go through passport control. Passports are checked. If there's data associated with them being dangerous, thanks to what we've collected ourselves or what we get in collaboration with other countries, then you can stop them, whether they be EU citizens, non-EU citizens, or from anywhere. We control our borders perfectly. The issue with freedom of movement is about rights of residence and rights of employment. That's what you want to control. Don't confuse that with borders, because then people get confused about issues of terrorism and so forth and so on. That is completely separate. So the idea that hard Brexiters like to pursue is that we come out of this freedom of movement agreement, but then of course we want to maximise access for those that we hold to be high value. What we are finding now, however, though, is that it's not just scientists that are high value and bankers that are supposedly high value. It is also, for example, the fruit pickers that our farmers couldn't survive without, and social care workers and so forth and so on. So they need to be clear, if they want to reduce immigration overall, what sector of society it is that we're actually going to restrict on immigration employment. Also, it's not likely that any arrangement that we come across for ourselves in order to allow privileged elite, shall we say, access for some sectors of society and others, it's probably unlikely that would do anything to encourage the EU to allow us access to all of the science funding programme or all of the single market, given that it's been shown that there's about 81% support across the EU for freedom of movement. So they could well use us rejecting freedom of movement as an excuse to cherry pick from us the things about the single market that are profitable and they want to keep, and give us some degrees of access, but not the most highly valuable aspects that they would want to keep for themselves. The other solution is, of course, to retain freedom of movement but with modifications. So when the Eastern European countries were becoming part of the EU, we could have had restrictions on their access to the UK and decided not to take that advice and not to go through with it. Similarly, there was a fund set to 10 million, I think it was, within this country to soften the strains that increased immigration puts on local communities. When the 2010 coalition government came in, because of austerity, that was scrapped. Clearly that was a mistake, and that's clearly something that you can do to buffer against the strain of immigration, whether it comes from, you know, Swansea or whether it comes from Sweden. If you have a lot of people coming into an area for new work that's generated there, then you do need to be able to match it with funds for schools, hospitals, transport and so on. So funding, that's a national level issue. But then there are also other things that you can do, such as the Swiss did recently, which was to say, actually, said the Swiss, we're going to keep the freedom of movement framework. Regardless of our 2014 referendum, we're not going to go back to the quota system. We're going to implement the other part of what that referendum was about, which was a preferential hiring of Swiss workers over EU workers. We're going to keep that bit so that our local communities can be reassured that they get first pick at jobs, and then it goes to further those who are further out or from other countries. And that is something that the EU clearly has accepted as a policy, because it's given the Swiss access to the Horizon 2020 programme in its fullness, in its entirety, already, starting from January the 1st, 17. So that is the solution that I favour, that we would actually keep the freedom of movement framework, because it's a very productive framework and it brings in money, and then use that money on the national level to deal with pockets of local communities where there is strain from immigration. You know, put the money in. If the issue with immigration is not racism or xenophobia, but rather because it strains local systems, you can fund that. And then similarly, to guard against concerns that people have about them not being able to get local jobs because they're going to people from Romania and Bulgaria or whatever, if you have a clause whereby they get first pick at it, well then I think that that is enough in order to keep a productive framework overall, but make sure you're actually properly investing in local communities so that the whole framework that we're involved in does not steamroller over them, but rather provides funds in order to strengthen those local communities. So there you have it. I mean, instead of going on about rhetoric with immigration and freedom of movement and control of borders and what the will of the people is and things like that, and all of these awful political sound bites, let's just take a good mechanical look at all the different options that are available to us on a national level, both in and outside the freedom of movement framework, and then what might be available on an EU-wide level, as has been shown by the Swiss. And let's have that mechanical discussion of how we can all tick the boxes that we want to tick, which is maximizing the opportunities of individuals to work where they want to work, and maximizing the protection of local communities in order to ensure that they are jobs rich in a productive way. That's where I hope we can take the debate next year. Let me know your thoughts.